I'm Orestria, a goth girl in Japan, and welcome to my seasonal impressions video for fall 2021, aka the season of the mecha. That's right, the season of the mecha. There were 5 mecha shows, so as a bonus game, you can check out where they all land on my list. As always, I will talk about the shows I watched from worst to best, as well as putting them into 3 categories: Nope, Fine, and Recommend. Finally, a programming note. JoJo Stone Ocean has a December release, which is the last month of the fall season, so I'm going to talk about it in the winter video instead. I should start numbering these. That's the YouTube algorithm way, right? Although I skip all the other important things. Let's try it. I watched 28 shows this season. Up first is our Nope category. These are shows that I don't think are worth your time. Tesla Note. This is a show about ninjas. The main character appears to be a high school ninja girl, at least. If you're wondering how Tesla is involved, I did not get that far. The cold open was fine, but it turns out that's because they weren't the main characters. You see, we are repeating the sins of the past by using 3D models for main characters and 2D characters for background characters, and having both on screen at the same time. So 2D characters nearly getting hit by a 3D train was actually the best the show looked. The point where I quit was when the high school ninja girl met Ninja Boy, who wasn't impressed by how young she was, and it gave me flashbacks to Ruby. All the worst parts of Ruby, where it's just characters inanely speaking to each other. Ruby has some of the best fight scenes, and it still couldn't keep my attention, and I doubt that this show is going to do better. Shinka no Mi Shiranichi Uchi ni Kachigumi Shinsei. Why did I rank this one higher? Well, at least it was watchable in the most technical of senses. AnyChart, please tag things as ecchi for me, seriously. Then I won't be shocked when the first scene is a naked girl appearing, pressing her tits against the main character. Also, this cold open is in media res, and the episode flashes back to the isekai origin, and we don't make it back to this point in the rest of the episode, so it was literally just tits to make sure you knew that there would be tits in this show. This is an isekai. A godly being announces to the class at school that they all have the ability to see each other's stats, video game style, and that they have a few moments to group themselves and they'll be sent to another world in groups. What reaction do people have? Freaking out? Disbelief? They're pretty calm. And they immediately decide the smartest thing to do is go as one large group. Minus the class loner. When he asks to join, they scan him and discover he has literally the worst possible stats and decide to exclude him. And also tease him for smelling bad. Which leads me to my biggest problem with this show. It was offensively fat-phobic. Why is he a loner? Because he's fat. They tease him for smelling bad because he's fat. And the show suggests that he does, in fact, smell bad. Then, when they get the ability to see people's stats, he has the worst possible stats. So the show is justifying this idea that he's inferior because he's fat. Because the cold open showed him as thin, and I'm a masochist, I cranked up the speed to 1.5 to see how pissed off I was going to get. And I just wanted to add that watching it at 1.5 felt natural. There were no moments where I was like, oh, that came out weird because of the speed up. So this show is desperately slow. Our main character decides the solution to his wilderness survival is to eat pretty much everything he finds, regardless of whether it's edible or not. He finds and eats some evolution fruit, which, once he evolves, make him a proper OP main character for isekai shows. And of course, the evolution is totally represented only by him becoming slim. Can't be fat and powerful. Please keep in mind that in Japan, I am can't buy clothes in the store levels of plus size. I currently weigh as little as I have since I was 22. So yeah, it's definitely fucked up suggesting to overweight high school kids that they're worthless if they're overweight. Especially in a country where someone who is not overweight might still feel fat. Like, this is a character who was described as overweight in her show. Hi, this is Editing Orestria. So, I was getting clips of Sakura from Danbei Nankere Omoteru because they constantly talk about like how fat she is and how she needs to lose weight, but as she's drawn on screen, she doesn't even register to me as overweight, except for the comedy scenes where they're like bulging fat. Like if you just put her side by side with her friends, she doesn't look that crazy. So since it actually gave us her details on screen, I decided to put them into a BMI calculator. BMI is not a great way of measuring things, but I thought it would give a base idea. Based on the height and weight entered, the BMI is 21.6, which is a healthy weight. BMI, the healthy weight is between like 18.5 and 25. My BMI is 24, getting close to the overweight, which means I am distinctly more overweight than this character.
Whoa! Hibiki, what's with your zipper? You're literally spilling out all over! Huh?
Kyuketsuki sugu shinu, or the vampire dies quickly. We meet a famous vampire hunter, who would like you to buy his book, please and thank you. He comes to a town and is told that the great old vampire in the castle has kidnapped a child from the village, and immediately agrees to go rescue the child, particularly since slaying an ancient vampire would bring him a lot of clout and publicity. He throws open the door to the castle, which hits the vampire, who dies. Not Dracula turns to dust, or I guess sand, since he says sand when he dies, but he reconstitutes quickly. Turns out he's a giant wimp who can be killed by the slightest of things, but seems to still be immortal because he always comes back. And I want him to actually die, since he has a bad habit of literally saying sand every time he dies. Why did he kidnap the kid? He didn't. The vampire has a big video game collection, and the kid has been sneaking in to play those games every day without his knowledge. On this particular day, he got caught up in the game and forgot to go home, and decided he would get in less trouble if he stayed overnight and faked a kidnapping than turning up to dinner late. The animation is aggressively pedestrian, and I won't say that I didn't laugh, but I will say the gag was getting old less than halfway through the first episode, and I cannot imagine watching more of it. Deep Insanity, The Lost Child. I'm sorry, it's all caps. I have to say it that way. Deep Insanity, The Lost Child. In the Antarctic, a hole has opened up, leading to a previously unknown part of the world, with strange monstrous creatures, and amazing new resources. A town grows up around it, and the adventurers who go in to get the resources. I liked the character designs, and that we got a nice mix of genders for once. I noticed that there were white characters with Western-style names, and Japanese characters with Japanese names, which made me kind of interested in that potential world building. Our main character, Shigure Daniel, joins up with the people who explore and try to find resources. Up until this point, it seemed kind of generic, but not offensively so. They bring Shigure along with a mission, even though they didn't have a chance to have him do the planned training sims before, and even though the characters have done nothing about talk about how dangerous this place is. And the show has shown us how dangerous it is in the cold open too, which just seems like a huge liability. Speaking of a huge liability, they don't wear helmets, even though all the other groups we've seen do. And then the fight happens, and oh god, it's Garbo. The CG literally looks like slimy poop. The show gives both the impression that this is a standard encounter that our team should handle easily, but also has the girl back at base instructing them and giving the experienced fighters what amounts to really basic instruction, which is clearly for the sake of the audience. Like, they need to have their 5 weapons authorized for the fight, and then in the next fight they don't go through that procedure, so it was clearly just clunky exposition to let us know that the weapons are 5 weapons and that they materialized from nowhere for some reason. No, I don't know what 5 means. Basically, the character designs were pretty nice, but the rest of the show was just kind of inept in its delivery. Senpai ga usai kohai no hanashi. This is a basic rom-com. Its main advantage for me is that it's about adults in an office, not high school kids. Our main character is a professional woman who happens to be very short. Yes, even for Japan. I don't get why she hangs her full-length mirror so high that she'll only ever see from her waist up, but that's her business. At work, she sometimes has to work with a senpai, a more experienced coworker, who's absolutely huge. This is a mountain of a man with a deep, booming voice. And yes, this is the entire concept. The relationship between a small woman and a large man. That's the plot. The animation was pretty standard, and none of the jokes worked for me. I tried speeding it up, and when that didn't help, I stopped. Sankaku Mado no Sotogawa wa Yoru. This is a BL show, a romance between men. I'm a Fujoshi, a girl who loves BL. And here the show is in my nope category. Oh no. I had a decent time in the first episode, honestly. BL rarely gets anime adaptations, and this one isn't about high schoolers, and it's more than just a rom-com, so that's a huge plus. The blonde is an exorcist, and when he finds out that the dark-haired man can see spirits, he rather forcibly recruits him into being his sidekick. Like reaching in and touching the guy's soul, which is portrayed as being very pleasurable. Definitely a sex metaphor. And here's the thing. I like BL in the abstract, but I actually find a lot of BL unwatchable or unreadable, because it's a genre that isn't very concerned with consent. I'm quite picky with my BL. The first episode was a little rough with the reaching out and touching his soul without asking or explaining what he was going to do thing. And then the show doubled down in the second episode with psychic body swapping without permission, and then basically having the brunette sign a contract where on paper what he thought he was signing was like a normal contract, but he doesn't know that it actually bound him to the blonde, and it was just making me really uncomfortable. Definitely a shame, since it seems like a high school girl is our big bad / quasi-serial killer, and that part was amusing. Build Divide, Code Black. I would have been hella into this show in high school. That's not a good thing. This show is centered around a card game called Build Divide. It takes place in a city where everything about you is determined by your skill at the game. If you suck, you'll live in a shitty part of town. The society is all separated that way, to the point where there's a king, and he's the best at the game, and if you beat him, you get a wish, or become the king, or something. The first episode was fine. We started out following a girl, and she bumps into an amnesiac guy and teaches him about Build Divide. She decides to teach him on the job by challenging him to a match. Partway through, he starts remembering how to play, because it turns out he's super awesome at the game, and he beats her even though she's been presented as very capable. Also, the whole show is vaguely gothy. He has this cool black hoodie that can cover his mouth, which reminds me a little bit of professional poker players who use sunglasses or hoodies to obscure their facial expressions. His deck is very edgy with a lot of cemetery plays and a death-themed roulette wheel. Then, in the second episode, the female main character no longer feels on the same level as him, but just like she's his support. And they go to high school, and one of their classmates challenges him, and the wheels are just falling off. It's becoming increasingly obvious that the show isn't really interested in letting us know enough about the game to play along, so we constantly have to be told what's happening. This works really poorly in the second episode, where they're trying to show that the classmate is really bad at the game, but we don't know that these things are errors because we don't know enough about the game, so the female main character has to keep telling us that this girl is making mistakes. The things I do know about the game seem like really terrible from a balance point of view. You only have 10 health. Less really, because sometimes when you take damage, there's a buster card that deals another hit to you. And the cards don't have summoning sickness, so whoever goes first basically gets a guaranteed free hit. A free hit of 10% of your life seems pretty overpowered. I can't pass up this chance to talk about the way the second episode starts. It starts with the most inept exposition I've seen since Street Fighter II the animated movie. And I quote, "If you're good at Build Divide, you can enjoy an affluent life in the center of the city. This society is shaped by hyper-democracy, using Build Divide's meritocracy-based order as its social infrastructure. One person has unified the will of the people and determined the direction the society will take. That person is the king." What? Despite the show looking really nice and appealing to my aesthetics, once you start adding in high school setting and a really annoying ganky clumsy girl, and really realize how terrible the world building is and the card game itself, I just can't endorse this. It feels very style over substance. And we come to the fine section. Shows that I think are suitable if they have a genre or feature you're particularly into, but aren't really amazing. Tsuki to Laikan to Nosferatu. This is an interesting show for sure, set place in an alternate universe Cold War during the space race, where they've technically changed the names of the countries, but it's pretty obvious who's who. The Russian space program is in the lead, having sent a dog to space. They want to be the first to get a human to space, but absolutely can't afford it to go poorly. They'd already covered up that Laika hadn't gone as well as they'd claimed, but they can't do the same trick again if it's a person, because a person would be expected to communicate back. So, they decide to go to a vampire instead. Vampires are a group of people who are not human, but are basically human. They're sensitive to sunlight and heat, but borderline immune to the cold. Very convenient when you live in the Russian countryside. The show seems like it's mostly going to be about the relationship between the female vampire and her male human handler, who had hoped to become a cosmonaut himself, but this new assignment basically means it's completely hopeless now. It did make me think about how, despite all the heavy moon symbolism you see associated with vampires, I don't actually remember much about vampires in space or vampires actually going to the moon. But overall, it didn't spark my interest. It was a bit slow and ponderous. There wasn't really anything wrong that I saw. Oh, and if you really, really like close-ups of well-drawn mouths, this is the show for you. Puraware, Pride of Orange. This show's first crime is having Canada lose Olympic gold in hockey. Just kidding. The show definitely had a good first impression, with a very well-animated hockey scene, followed, strangely, by a well-animated dance scene. Why these two things are happening together, Despite being Canadian, I'm not that into hockey. And dance idol shows are one category of show that I actually regularly don't watch, even for these seasonal impressions. I did appreciate the quality animation since it suggests that people making it care. So, is this a show about cute girls doing hockey, or is it an idol show? Well, after the cold open, we go to the Embroidery Club with slice of life cute girls doing cute embroidery things, until a little later on they go to a free hockey lesson. This show has no idea what it wants to be. The slow life cute girls vibe doesn't really work with a sports show, and I don't understand why it's also an idol show. I guess if you happen to be interested in all of these things, then this is the show for you. I'm into none of these things, so it didn't hold my attention. Kyokai Senki. Hey look, a mecha show. This is a mecha show where Japan is being oppressed by several factions who have invaded and are controlling Japan. I'm sorry I can't really be more clear, but despite the info dump about it, they didn't really do anything to set up the factions, so it didn't stick in my head very well. I want to start by praising this show for having 2D animation, even for the robots. But the plot just felt like convenience after convenience, and it really over-explained things that were obvious, while failing to explain the things I actually needed explained. It didn't leave much of an impression at all, actually, which, when I was writing the script, resulted in me staring at my notes for the show for a few minutes like, what show is this? Mutaking, the Dancing Hero. This show is apparently a remake of an old show, which I think explains the character designs, which are a bit of an older style. A boy moves to a city with his grandma. He's really good at dancing, but doesn't see the value in this talent. The city is being run by the most obvious evil corporation ever, which is a send-up of Apple, But somehow, everyone in town doesn't notice and goes along with it. The boy runs into a black man whose name includes DJ.
Or are you looking for DJ?
DJ seems to be the only person aware that the evil corporation is evil. He protects the boy from their influence and helps him transform into Mutaking, the Dancing Hero. I really enjoyed the first episode. I liked the vibe of the show. I really liked this scene where they set up the boy's dancing ability by having him dodge catastrophes. But the fight scene is really dated. It has terrible CG. It's like a really cheap music video. It went downhill from there. It felt like very little progress was made each episode, and each episode ends in an almost identical fight scene. I did really love the evil octopus send-up of Apple. That was funny. Shikizakura. This is a Sentai show taking place in my hometown, Nagoya. If you follow my list by now, you can tell I'm not a fan of these cheap CG shows. This is the most acceptable one so far in terms of appearance. It actually has some really beautiful scenes, and some wonkiness. But it's a hometown production. I'm forgiving this show way too many sins just for showing Hisaya Odori Park from before they ruined it. There are demons in this world, but the general population are not aware of them. At most, there's this famous incident from 8 years ago where something went down and a whole neighborhood got cratered, and there was only one survivor. But it's more of a mystery to the world. They don't know it was demons. Speaking of that one survivor, he is our main character. He saw the demons as a child, and now he's a teen, which means he's prime main character age. He once again ends up in a rift or parallel space where the demons are attacking this museum, but the general population doesn't seem to be involved, and then a group of Sentai come to fight them, complete with a super naive, spoiled rich girl priestess who the main character helped use her cell phone earlier in the episode. He finds a possessed fighting suit and uses it to help save the day, using his willpower to fight back against the demon controlling the suit. The first 2 episodes had a lot of setup and a lot of fights, and they were fine. Third episode is where it completely lost me, and mild spoilers from episode 3 from here on. So the CG was holding up fine with the fight scenes, but in this episode they decided to go for melodrama. And I don't know how else to explain this aside from saying that the acting of the character models is not good enough to sustain it. And in case that wasn't enough of a problem on its own, the presentation of the scenario was also really bad. In the first 2 episodes, the demon attacks were always like a group of demons open up a portal in an area. And in this episode, we're introduced to the idea of them possessing people, which is cool, especially because what they showed was them possessing one of the Sentai crew. Like, holy shit. And then the OP happened, and the possession from the cold open doesn't even get brought up again for like 5 minutes, leaving me wondering if the girl is possessed now and the demon's like pretending to be normal. And then I decided like, oh, this must be before the possession. It started in medias res and now we're leading back up to it, especially because the girl and her best friend get in a fight, and that would weaken the girl's willpower and allow her to get possessed. But that doesn't fit with the presentation in the cold open because they were in good terms in that scene. So then we find out that the possession is actually something that happened in the past that she's already defeated. But now she's angsting about it now, even though she was fine for the first 2 episodes. And I think they're trying to suggest that something that happened in the fight brought up this angst. Like, she did almost get hurt in the fight, but it didn't feel like a big moment, and I don't get how it relates to that trauma. And this is very typical, where after the setup episodes you start doing single character episodes, but this was just such a poor presentation, and I couldn't make it through the episode. Muv Love Alternative. Hey look, a mecha show. Now, this is a weird one. In this show there are terrible aliens that have destroyed much of the world. Japan hasn't gone down yet, but they're under attack and losing ground quickly. The first episode brings us to a military base preparing for an attack, but the attack ends up being much larger than they were prepared for, and we watch virtually everyone be slaughtered. If you're like me, you're wondering why something with a cutesy name like Muv Love is a war story with horrible monsters destroying the world. So I looked it up. Muv Love is an erotic visual novel dating sim video game. It starts as a romantic comedy before going to some dark places, and Muv Love Alternative is actually the final arc of the story. The first arc is normal, and then the second and third arcs take place in this alternate timeline with humanity on the brink of extinction. The first episode was really grim, and looking into it, I found a quote on Wikipedia saying that the author of Attack on Titan took inspiration from this, and I 100% see it. Attack on Titan's first episode is basically this episode, but executed better in every way. Which leads me to why I stopped watching this, because I would rather just finish watching Attack on Titan than watch this. It was really cool finding out the link between the two, and reading about the whole Muv Love saga. If you're into erotic novels, these ones actually seem pretty highly recommended, so you should check them out. Mieruko-chan. This is a show about a high school girl who can see all the horrific ghosts creeping around that other people can't see. And then the gag is that she has to pretend like she can't see them. So she's absolutely terrified, but she's no-selling ghosts that are all up in her face. I think this is a great idea for a show, but I did not enjoy watching it myself. The ghost designs were successfully very creepy, and the first encounter, when I wasn't sure what was going on in the show, was really, really tense. But from then on, it just felt really repetitive, and I did not find it funny. Add in a bunch of really unnecessary panty shots, and I am out. Heike Monogatari. This is a Japanese historical show with some fantasy elements like psychic powers, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It does kind of assume you're already familiar with the history that it's talking about, which is very reasonable since the target audience is Japanese people, but that's not me. And really, this kind of show is not my thing. I'm more into trash than art house, but I appreciate its existence, and if you're into history or just absolutely gorgeous shows, you should definitely check it out. Shumatsu no Harem. This is an ecchi harem show about a pandemic wiping out mankind, with an emphasis on the man. All men are killed. Even if someone gives birth to a new male child, the child dies. The only men capable of surviving and reproducing are like 5 guys that went into cryo sleep for 5 years as part of an experimental MS cure in Japan. Something about whatever the nanotech AI did to cure their MS has made them immune to the disease and able to reproduce male offspring successfully, although attempts to make a vaccine from them have not yet been successful. There are also a few men in cryosleep who haven't died yet, but are in desperate need of some kind of vaccine or treatment, because even in this slowed down metabolic state, they will die soon, including the male character's best friend. Furthermore, our main character was madly in love with the girl and actually confessed to her right before he went into cryosleep, and it seemed like she was into it. But when he wakes up, he finds out she's gone missing. No one knows where she is or how to contact her. He wants to go find her, but he's not free to go, because the powers that be want him to breed to produce more men. This results in many naked women attempting to have sex with him. Yeah, I'm as shocked as you that I put this in the fine section, but I will mention a couple caveats. Firstly, I've only seen the first episode because after airing the first episode, it got delayed until next year. Number 2, I'm asexual. While some asexuals eschew any kind of sexual content, I've always had more of a fascination. Like David Attenborough observing animals, I observe the allosexuals and the things that they're into. I took every gender and sexuality course available at my university, going into 4 or 5 different disciplines on the topic. So I don't know how much of this show I will end up watching when more is released, because I'm not here for the titillation. However, I found this setup really fascinating. I love that they have a decent reason for a large number of women to be interested in this guy. He is a very rare resource. I like that it means the women in this harem are actively engaged in wanting to have sex, because showing women's active desire is something pretty rare in media. I like that it's a harem, but it's not really tied down to the idea of monogamy, because it would actually be a poor choice for the human race if he only settled with one woman, although given his interest in the potential girlfriend character, it could still go that way. I love that the show treated him realistically. I get a bunch of guys who are going to be like, that would be the best thing ever, I would go slam into all... whatever, I don't know. But the reality of knowing that every man you ever knew is dead is serious and treated with appropriate gravitas. Of course this guy is upset, and the idea that you're about to keep him captive and breed him like a stallion for the sake of humanity is horrific. How much choice does he get in the matter? Sure, they're coming at it from a point of you can choose whichever woman you want, but you do need to do it. And I'm sure a bunch of guys are going to call this guy a wimp, but I think it's really realistic. I wish the show would acknowledge asexual people, or trans people, or intersex people, but this being an anime, I was impressed that they even mentioned homosexuality. In any case, I've spent multiple days thinking of the fascinating implications of the world the show is bringing to me. And I don't know if that will translate into me watching a lot more, but I am sincerely glad I watched the first episode, and when it comes out, I will give the second a chance. This title is like a full-ass paragraph. 真の仲間じゃないと勇者のパーティーを追い出されたので、辺境でスローライフすることにしました。In this world, everyone has a blessing, like being great at farming or whatever. In some cases, it's a role. Our main character is the brother of a girl who was born with the hero role, and his role was to support her in discovering her quest. In effect, this makes him really great at a lot of low-level skills like speed and recovery. Yeah, it's one of those vaguely video logic fantasy worlds. However, once the hero and their party started taking on higher level enemies, he was no longer able to keep up. And he ends up getting kicked out of the hero's party without the hero even knowing, and so he's in hiding in this little tiny town, trying to make a pharmacy. Why is it always a pharmacy? There were these scenes that felt like they were hinting at something dark or fucked up happening, but this is a slow life type show where it's about hanging out and being chill, so I don't really get why those hints were there. And it ended up ruining the slow aspect for me because I couldn't just chill. I kept thinking up scenarios where this show could go off the rails and go really dark. The second episode introduces the girl who is the main romantic interest. It seems like his hero sister is going to show up and be a third wheel at some point. And I really wasn't into the relationship between the two main characters. And between that and my brain being stuck imagining plot stuff, I just wasn't interested anymore. Gyakuten Sekai no Denshi Shoujo. Hey look, a mecha show! In this show, Japan is under the control of the military with lockdowns and curfews. Our main character is a host who's in a lot of debt. Also in this world, for some reason, otaku things are underground. He has an anime ringtone and no one recognizes it, and he pretends it's not an anime ringtone, but the main girl recognizes it. This host guy has an interesting duality to him. He takes off his glasses to be this flirty host. He doesn't put in contacts either, so he's more or less blind doing it. And then when he puts on his glasses, he's a lot more serious. When government mechs come down, he grabs some money and does his best to logically figure out how to get to safety. However, in the process, he finds a mecha and uses it to save the man to whom he owns debt. And this doesn't clear his debt at all, so he actually probably should have let that guy die. Unbeknownst to him, there's actually a woman in the mech with him. She's the energy supply. Denshi Shoujo means battery girl. In order to make this mecha move, you have to make her fangirl heart sing. If she's excited, the mecha will be really strong, and if she's demoralized, there will be no energy. She's also part of the resistance, so the host and his debt collector end up with the resistance. This show looks very slick, and I find a really amusing potential in the idea of using fangirls as an energy source, but I got really frustrated with the storytelling, so I stopped watching. For example, the first episode starts in medias res, and then backtracks to let us know that he's a host and that he's in debt, except it already showed him being a host right before the mech came down, and he saves his debtor, and then the debtor keeps holding the debt over his head, so you really didn't need to backtrack to show us that. So all the backtracking did was totally stall out the show's momentum right at the start. Also, the show is going into the liar revealed trope, which is one of my least favorite tropes in general, where the host has to pretend to be this hero to keep the girl motivated, but actually he's just doing it for the money. Sakugan! Hey look, a mecha show! I was super excited for this. The first episode made me think of Decadance. The animation is awesome. This is a world where people live in colonies, and there's also a big wild and dangerous area that markers, the people with mechs, explore. And you can get resources there that are worth a lot of money, and just kind of have a cowboy vibe. The father is an ex-marker who is frustrated by his genius kid. She's like 8 or something, and she's already graduated university. She's been having dreams about this magical looking place, and she wants to become a marker and find it. He's having a hard enough time convincing her not to, when a legendary marker gives her photographic evidence of the location of her dreams. And a map. Well, fuck. And then giant monsters attack. And it's really obvious that they're specifically chasing the girl, although at the point where I stopped watching, no one in the show had acknowledged this yet. I really do think the first episode was excellent. Lesser shows would need 3 episodes to do all the setup that this show completed in 1, and it did it all with good character building and animation. Then the show kind of stalled out. The father-daughter dynamic that I liked in the first episode got really repetitive. It felt like they were having the exact same argument, and each episode would be like, have a fight, solve it. Next episode, have the same fight again, solve it. But if you watch that really good first episode and you don't get as frustrated as I do from the shift afterwards, I think there's probably a lot of potential here. Visual Prison. The first time I tried to talk about this show, I ended up writing enough that it looks like it's going to be its own roast video. So, take 2, the TLDR version. This is a show about rock and roll vampires living in the trendiest part of Tokyo. All the vampires are gothic pretty boys, and there's a secret second red vampire moon, the Scarlet Moon, that gives vampires all their energy and punishes them if they break the rules. Who makes the rules? Vampire rock bands that win the yearly visual prison competition. The band who most pleases the Scarlet Moon gets a scarlet tear. Get 10 of those, and you make a new rule. Anja moves to Harajuku, finds out he's a Dhampir, hangs out with the vampires, and starts a band. The show has good music with so bad they're good lyrics, very, very pretty boys, gay baiting, a lot of slice of life faffing about, and very predictable plot lines. It is absolutely my kind of trash. That said, if you're not a rotted Fujoshi goth girl like me, probably just skip it. The quality's fine for what it is. Platinum End, a death game adjacent show by the creator of Death Note. Sign me the fuck up! Okay, this one had so much potential. Our MC has had a terrible life. His family was killed when he was a child, forcing him to live with an abusive aunt and uncle. He chooses to kill himself, jumping off a building, only to be rescued by an angel. She offers him some superpowers to return joy to his life, so he'll choose to live. Of course, there's a catch, and now he is a god candidate. I like how the concept of the show accidentally explains God literally behaving differently in different eras. Like, from time to time there's this game to become God, so it's actually just different gods. This show is not explicitly a death game, but it feels like it's going to go that way. Our main character doesn't care about being God. He just wants to be happy and allow other people to be happy, which you might recognize sounds like a pretty nice goal for God to have. But when he discovers some less benevolent God candidates, it moves him to action. Theoretically. I have already seen main character's bad because he's a simp takes online, and it is funny. Imagine hating a man for having genuine romantic feelings for a girl. She doesn't return the feelings, but so what? He should hate her? People are weird. That said, I do agree that the main character is absolutely the worst part of this show. It is frustrating to watch because he never does anything. Things just happen around him and he's distressed by them but doesn't act. His lack of agency is just intense. Like, the main antagonist, at least as far as I watched, Metropoliman, is despicable but infinitely more interesting. The parts of the show where you're watching him are honestly more enjoyable. I feel like maybe the author was unhappy with people idolizing Light in Death Note. Like, maybe that wasn't their goal, so this was an attempt to course correct, but it's not going well. Add to that a just really gross misogynist attitude to women overall as a show, and I just couldn't watch anymore. That said, if you just want to laugh at some serious edginess, this could work for you. Megaton Q Musashi. Hey look, a mecha show! Our main character is a rough and tumble guy who doesn't really let anyone tell him what to do. He skips school, he gets in fights, but really deep down he's a good guy. Then there's this other guy who's like a rival gang guy, and they fight. But when the chips are down and something really heinous is going on, they'll team up and eventually become good friends. There's this smart, mysterious one who's pretty and solves things with his intellect, and a childhood friend girl who follows around the main character. I kid. But I was picking up some Yu Yu Hakusho influence in some of the main characters, and that is not a complaint. See, at least at the start of the show, I found the mech battles to be the worst part. Not a complaint about the CG for once. The CG is pretty good, although it gave me claymation vibes. The fights were really, like, childish. Like, charging energy cannon at 100, fire energy cannon! Like, just a bunch of talking about the move, and then yelling, and then the move happening. That did improve as the show went on. But what really hooked me were the characters and the character dynamics, which I found quite interesting. You may have noticed that while I usually start by describing the plot of the show, I haven't here. And that's because I don't want to ruin the first episode. This show isn't amazing, or it'd be in the recommend section. There's nothing here I haven't seen before.
ついに僕にもこの日が来たんだ。これこそが恋なんだ。
Okay, except for a guy falling in love with a cat. But everything is well done, well presented, well paced. I had a good time watching. Our main characters are himbos, and the music during the mecha scenes is some epic shit. This show is delightfully stupid in the good way, in a joyous way. They're not taking themselves seriously, which is a good choice given their relatively well-trodden plot. Tact Op Destiny. This is a show taking place in a world where alien organisms have attacked Earth, and they are particularly attracted to music. Humans created humanoid weapons from music known as music art to fight them, run by the Symphonica organization. There was a kind of great war with a lot of destruction, but we're in a sort of reconstruction era, where things are relatively peaceful and people are slowly rebuilding. However, the monsters aren't completely gone, so music has basically been lost. People don't play music because it can attract disaster. Our main character, Tact, is obsessed with music, though. All he thinks about is music. He has a magnetic attraction to pianos. He, his friend, and her music art sister are traveling the country to go to the Symphonica because, how the sister became a music art is a bit of a mystery. This show is very, very pretty. It's made by Madhouse and Mappa, so... The music art designs in particular scream, "Cosplay me!" with each music art being inspired by a different piece of classical music. The music in this show is also very good, but I mean, it would have to be, right? Most of the world building is really nice. There are some shows that take place outside of Japan where they do a bad job of making it feel that way, but this really feels like an American road trip. There are a variety of people of different races, and aside from Tact, most people have American names. Or the sisters have French names. Tact is a Japanese family name, so I guess he's Japanese American. I did quickly notice that the conductors are always men and the music arts were always women, which was a choice. It's a bit yikes. Sadly, it made sense when I discovered this show is basically a very well-produced ad for a mobile game. That also explains why even the background music arts are so lovingly designed, because they're in the mobile game. So, of course it's all girls, because that's how mobile games work. Ugh. Nothing here to put it over the edge to a general recommendation. It has some pretty action, cute designs, some good emotional character interactions, and I had fun. Sekai Saiko no Ansatsu sha Isekai Kizoku ni Tensei suru. I cannot express to you how scared I was when I decided to watch the first episode of this. This is another show by the person who created Redo of Healer. But I really liked this. It does not have the same kind of edgy or vile plot as Redo of Healer. There is still a lot of sexualization of women, and if you're gonna watch the show, consider this your content warning for sexual assault, rape, prostitution, but it's not the same at all as that other show. In fact, if you skip episode 6, you will miss most of that content. Our story takes place in a fantasy world with a goddess, as is isekai tradition. And there's a hero who's going to defeat the Demon King. That hero is not our main character. See, the goddess needs the hero to kill the Demon King, but her problem is that she knows the hero is going to fuck up the world after that. So she needs someone to kill the hero after he kills the Demon King. So when the titular world's greatest assassin dies, she offers him reincarnation into her fantasy world. A chance to live his life how he wants, instead of being just a tool like he was in his first life. His only real regret. The catch being, he needs to kill the hero. He's reborn into a family of aristocratic doctors who are secretly assassins. He also gets to literally choose his skills, which was a strangely compelling scene for me. We then see him living his life, even as a child, working to set up his plans and learn everything he'll need for when the time comes. He's metagaming his entire life. This show can introduce me to a new character and have me care enough about them to be like, oh no! 3 minutes later. That's not bad. Most of the time it's pretty breezy, especially for a show about assassins, although it definitely veers dark occasionally. I like to imagine it as the author occasionally remembering they're the person who made Redo of Healer. Have I mentioned Redo of Healer enough times? I am calling this show out for having a comedic relief mother character who's actually the creepiest character in the show. Yikes. Every scene with her is a pain. Our main character is definitely not a paragon of goodness. He uses people, who in this show are all sexualized women, for his own purpose. He is explicitly manipulating them. And this could be a no-go for many people. If you don't want to see it, I understand. That's why I'm bringing it up here. For me, it was tolerable because it was a thematic tension between him needing tools to accomplish his mission, but not wanting to make someone a tool the way he was in his past life. He does not use them in a sexual way, despite them apparently wanting him to. And he does try to make sure that they still have agency and can pursue their goals as well, as long as they're loyal to him. Also, despite all the girls being into him, it doesn't feel like a normal harem because he is explicitly in love with one of the girls, and everybody knows it. This show had cool action, an interesting plot, some fun metagaming, but really weird sexual politics that stopped me from feeling comfortable putting it in the recommended section. But personally, I was always excited when I saw a new episode, and I definitely want season 2. Your mileage may vary. And finally, the recommended section. And we're feasting tonight. I've got 4 shows in this category this time. The first is Kimetsu no Yaiba. Oh, what to say. I don't want to go into a lot of detail because I have a full The List video planned for Kimetsu no Yaiba. But in case you haven't heard, this is an awesome shonen horror action show that is absolutely all the rage in Japan. And if you haven't seen it, you should give it a try. However, if you have already seen the Mugen Train movie, what they released in this season is mostly just the movie in anime form. And then starting from December, you can tell when I wrote the script, Jesus Christ. Starting from December, they were putting out the next arc after the Mugen Train. And I will say, they got budget, y'all. Sayate no Paladin. This is the most Dungeons & Dragons anime I have ever watched. For the record, the moment after I wrote that, a bard showed up. Elves, halflings, dwarves, skeletons, wyverns, and as the title suggests, paladins. A world where gods are real and can grant their power to people who will serve their will. This is also an isekai, but it doesn't feel like it. I frequently forgot that our main character had been isekai'd. Our main character lives thoroughly in the moment, only really thinking about his past life with regret, and using that as motivation to try hard to live life to the fullest in this world. Will has a rather unusual upbringing, being raised in a dead city with no other living humans around, and instead his parents are a skeleton, a ghost, and a mummy. One teaches him magic, one fighting, and one life skills. The perfect recipe to raise a hero. This is more on the adventure side and less on the action side. If you need a fight scene every episode, this isn't for you. It can be a little ponderous, which just makes it feel more like a Dungeons & Dragons campaign to me. Sometimes you'll have an epic battle, sometimes you'll just be exploring the city or meeting new people. My main critique would be that in classic D&D fashion, it is a bit of a sausage fest. Very few adventurers are women, and the ones who are more feminine classes, like healer, bard. But the complaint is balanced out by a lack of overtly sexualized women that are ever present in anime for me, though. Highly recommend. I had a wonderful time with this show. Komi-san wa kommyūshō desu. I was at the bookstore the other day and saw that this manga has 23 volumes. Oh boy. The first episode of the show was probably the best first episode of the season, which is very impressive for a chill high school comedy slice of life show. I enjoyed the whole season, but I think the animation was a notch above in the first episode, and it was such a vibe. There's a scene in that first episode that gives me chills and had me wrapped. But I should explain the plot. Komi is the school's goddess. You know the trope. Everyone loves her. If you sit next to her in class, everyone's gonna glare daggers at you. Everyone wants to be her, or be with her, or defeat her. Komi had nothing to do with this happening. In fact, she's bewildered. because Komi has a communication disorder. She's so anxious about speaking that she literally doesn't. Yet somehow everyone worships her and they're so in awe of her beauty that no one even notices that she doesn't speak. Until Tadano. Our main character is a regular guy, to the point where his name is a Japanese pun for just a normal person. He wants to blend into the scenery, but finds himself sitting next to Komi. Our bud Tadano is really good at reading the room. This is maybe the only skill he has in his whole life. And sitting next to Komi, he starts to notice her anxiety and realize something is up. And so he is the first person to notice her communication issues and the first person to become her friend. This show has a colorful cast of weirdos, and it wisely doesn't try to cram every person into every scene, trusting you to remember who people are when they show up again, even if it's a few episodes later. Which is aided by their naming scheme. Everyone's name is a pun for their defining trait. Komi's name is a reference to the Japanese pronunciation of communication. The character who is impossibly everybody's childhood friend, their name is a pun on childhood friend. There was even a one-off character in an episode who needed a tissue, whose name was a pun on wants a tissue. Most of the show is shorter skits. You can get several different ones in an episode. There are also a lot of puns, which is a classic in Japanese comedy shows. There are so many small, interesting things in this show. A lot of dialogue and manga text boxes are shown on the screen. I don't know if this is for accessibility or to make the puns more clear, but it gave it a distinct style. And as someone learning Japanese, I kept pausing and reading, and I legit learned some kanji from this show, so thanks. There's also a lot of silence. There aren't many shows with silence in general, but especially in the comedy genre. A lot of lesser comedies just throw loud, crazy shit at you, hoping to get a laugh. And this one is mature enough to just take a pause. Let it sit. It's also thematic, since many of these pauses are waiting to see if Komi is going to will sound from her lips or not. This show is fun and sweet and leaves me wanting more. Another show where I watched every episode basically as soon as they released. And my favorite show of the season, Blue Period. No, not that. I feel bad making that joke. I couldn't have not made it, but I still feel bad. Blue Period is a show about a Japanese high school boy. No, wait, don't go! Yatora isn't a self-insert character or a default protag-kun. His parents have already let him know that they don't have the money to send him to a fancy school, so he needs to get into someplace with his own skill. He's both kind of lackadaisical, a person who'll go along with his friends, smoking and staying out late and watching sports that he doesn't even like, but he's also a hard worker, studying constantly, facing a book as he walks. One day, he has to go back to the art room after school and discovers a huge, gorgeous oil painting that one of his senpai from the art club is making. This, and an odd moment of clarity in the wee hours of the morning, inspire him. And suddenly, he really applies himself to that project in art class, unlike his friends who take the piss out of it. Falling quickly into the art club in the world of art, he finds real passion for the first time in his life. Problem being, most art schools are pricey, and the only good school that isn't is Tokyo University, famed for its incredibly difficult entry exam that very few people pass. There's this beautiful tension between Yatora's practical side and his artistic side, the hard work and the inspiration. Yatora joins an art cram school, discovering things about art, his friends, and himself along the way. This show is so beautiful, so meaningful, so sweet. I got totally sucked in by the characters and their emotions. This isn't gonna be the most revolutionary plot, but the execution is stunning. This may be an anime, but all the characters are fleshed out. It feels like our main character is surrounded by real people, not anime tropes. Even background characters will have really distinctive features that make the world feel alive. There's a lot of shows where you look in a classroom and there are 2 or 3 obviously important characters and everyone else is just bland nothings. This show is about Yatora, about passion, about the importance of relationships, even brief passing connections. I love every fucking character in this show. Main character's delinquent friends? Yep. The art teachers? Yep.
So, does your boyfriend have big breasts? Yeah. If so, make sure to make them look plump and soft. Or jiggly if you prefer.
I could make an argument for just about every girl in the show being best girl. And I could do the same for just about all the boys. Just as an example, the senpai who accidentally encouraged him to pursue art, Mori senpai, is the most average-looking high school girl possible. There is zero romance between them. She has relatively little screen time in the show, but she has had such a huge impact on Yatoda's life, and he looks up to her as an inspiration. Like, what would Mori senpai do? Another character I particularly love is his cram school teacher. She's this tall, boisterous woman. I'm tall, and I rarely get to see women like me in media. There was a scene where she put her hand on the doorframe before going through in the classic "do I need to duck or not" gesture that I do all the time. I felt so seen. We find out later she's a mother, and I love that revelation because she's in no way defined by motherhood or motherliness while still being a mom. I could make a list of 100 little things like that make me love this show. Not only is this my favorite show of the season, it's just one of my favorite shows I've ever seen. Also, a good friend of mine watched the show because I made her, and then she started reading the manga, and she's like, "Oh my god, the comments were true, the manga is so much better." I don't understand how this is possible. Best Boy. There are a couple of good contenders for Best Boy. I think my honorable mentions will go to William and Mendoru from Sahete no Paladin. And Lenny from Tacto P. Will is a big old cupcake, and BFFs forever with the delightfully surly Mendoru.
麗しのメネルドールとかにしようかしら。最果てのパラディンと共に歩む英雄街道。
おい、それ実は女だったとかにされる流れだろ。
そんで、ビルと恋仲ね。
やめろ!
And for Lenny, I love seeing a strong androgynous person of color character in an anime. But I just have to go with Yatoda from Blue Period. The way he respects everyone he meets, seeing him challenge himself, seeing him struggle and overcome. He has a lot of insecurities, but seeing the way he reaches out to people and tries to help people is heartwarming. The strength of his show is the connection to his character, and given the effect the show had on me... I'm done. Well, he's my boo now. As for Best Girl, an honorable mention goes to the Tensho from Jahi-sama Won't Be Defeated. No, I don't remember her name, and I don't care. She is the sweetest, kindest lady. I should have watched more of Jahi-sama last season. It's still ongoing, and yes, I watched it all. But there's only really been one choice for Best Girl this season. In my notes on the first episode of her show, I wrote, "Is she already Best Girl?" And yes, she was. Komi-san. Komi-san is the epitome of a Best Girl. The show is light, cute, and funny, but it's balanced out by Komi. Seeing her anxiety just really hits home. The show endlessly emphasizes, in fact, the worst fucking part of the show is the same speech in every episode, that just because she has a communication disorder doesn't mean she doesn't want to communicate. Seeing how hard she tries, her willingness to pursue new experiences and challenges just makes you love and appreciate her more. All the characters in the show love her for these really shallow reasons. Like, she's pretty and talented at everything. But her desire for real friends and efforts to achieve it are the reasons she's really attractive. And now it's time for the non-binary highlight. These shows usually don't use any specific language about these characters, so I'm just doing my best here. Blue Period brings us Ryuji, who presents in female clothes, to the surprise of Yatoda, who definitely remembers them being in male clothes before. Yatoda doesn't use language that I would use when talking about Ryuji, but Yatoda is a literal Japanese high school boy, so he might not have better words to use. He's very befuddled by Ryuji, but their friendship continues nonetheless. and Yatsura is always there when Ryuji needs someone. And I get that I'm talking about this from Yatsura's point of view more than Ryuji's, but that's the way the show is. We're getting Yatsura's view. We're not getting Ryuji's thoughts on the matter. Compared to a lot of characters in anime where a non-standard gender presentation is there for laughs, this feels really natural. A couple of high school kids who don't have much education on gender and sexuality topics, just trying to understand each other and be understood. Biwa, the main character from Heike Monogatari, was dressed as a boy by their father and expresses a desire to continue to present as a boy. I only watched one episode of the show, so that's all I really have to say. Eve and Elizabeth from Visual Prison both have gender-neutral pronouns in the official English subtitles, but the official Japanese website confirms them as male. Could be a case of assigned male at birth and people trying to classify non-binary people with binary terms. Elizabeth in particular is very femme in presentation and goes by the name Elizabeth. Eve, again, the show doesn't talk about these things. They were possessed by a female vampire spirit who is sleeping most of the time. I don't know if that's why the show went with they pronouns, although the spirit declares themselves a princess and appears to be female identified. I don't know if Eve is non-binary, regardless of the female spirit possessing them. Also, this is a show that says vampires can't be women, so I don't know how we have a female vampire spirit anyway. Nakajima from Komi, like Ryuji, is someone the main character remembers as presenting masculine, but is now presenting as feminine. What I really liked is that, as I mentioned before, characters in this show are named for their defining trait, and Nakajima's defining trait is being everyone's childhood best friend, not anything to do with their gender. There are lots of small things in the show that call attention to the situation, and while some of them are not great, a lot of them are pretty cool. Just one example, there's a character who complains about Tadashi coming in her room because he's a guy, but she has no complaints when Nakajima comes in. Overall, this was a really great season in my opinion, and Winter has a bunch of sequel seasons to shows I liked, so that's exciting. I'm hoping to get back to Let's Plays, but the global health crisis has things really crazy at my work. It's been sapping my energy really hard. I was 60% done this video in December, and I was like, oh, I'll get it finished on my winter break and it'll be out in January, and today's Japanese word of the day is suna. It means sand.
ようがてめえの
思ってたよりブサイク。
バカ野郎何をマントが自動ドアに幼児か
I may say, fuck me.